Hello and welcome to the big picture. Last week, RBI Governor Raghuram Rajan, speaking at the London Business School, said a few things which spread some kind of a panic across the world. Expressing worry over the way growth is trying to be activated, he said, "We are slowly slipping into the kind of problems that we had in the 1930s. This was interpreted as the global economy heading towards another Great Depression of the 1930s, which had resulted in crippling the economies across the world and which took over a decade or more to recover. The reason why the world sat up and took notice of this rather ominous warning by Rajan was because he has been credited with having warned of the global recession witnessed between 2007 and 2009 in 2005 itself. Following the panic reaction, RBI yesterday issued a clarification saying that Raghuram Rajan did not imply that the world will be facing a Great Depression, as that had been caused by many factors. However, even after the clarification, economists across the world are discussing his warnings. So what does the warning of the RBI governor mean to the global economy in general and Indian economy in particular? How should the world take his advice or warning? We will discuss all this today with an eminent panel of guests. I have with me Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor to Government of India among a host of other things. Renu, Kohli, former staff member RBI and IMF. N.R.Bhaumurthy, member National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. And Paranjoy Guha Thakurta, senior journalist and economic analyst. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Desai, when Rajan says that we are slipping into some kind of problems which we had witnessed in the 1930s, what does he mean?
I'm a little surprised at the comparison because the antecedents of our current problems are nothing like the antecedents of what happened in 1929, where you had a crazy stock market boom which collapsed. There had been a huge expansion of credit in the 20s, which is what Irving Fisher argued, which led to this. And it was something which actually started reversing itself by about in another 2 or 3 years. So I'm a little surprised that at this point he has drawn a comparison with the 1930s. Because in a sense, what you're seeing in the West is really a continuation of something which started about, at least 6 years ago, in 2008. It's not something, there's no immediate trigger event. But the underlying thing that I sense in his thing is that I have a feeling that he feels that the basic problem of debt overhang of households, corporates and governments has still not been adequately resolved in the West.
And that applies to not just the developed economies, but even to the growing economies?
I would say more to the developed economies. Frankly, there are not too many developing economies with the same class of problems, plus 100% debt overhang had come. In India, for instance, we have a debt overhang problem mainly in the corporate sector.
Right.
Our household sector is not in that issue, nor do I believe that our public debt is a problem. So in that sense, yes, there is a problem of debt overhang in India, which is holding back investment and growth, but it's limited to the corporate sector. My feeling is more concern about the West, where it is not just the corporate sector.
And that can have an impact on other economies.
Absolutely, because it holds back demand.
Bhaumurthy?
Well,
how do you look at his statement?
No, I think, see, if you look at his talk, my feeling is that perhaps the press seems to have overplayed the word depression. In fact, if you look at his whole talk...
he never uses the word depression, but he talks about 1930.
He used the word depression only once. That is only in the conclusion part of it.
Right.
Maybe there is some discussion after the talk. But my reading of this is that he is only trying to express the frustrations of the emerging market economies, central bankers, in the absence of...
Yeah, in fact, he was talking of central bankers and how...
So in the absence of when there was no coordinated monetary policy in the international world. And he is also hinting that we are right now, we don't have any international leadership to address some of the common issues the whole world is facing. In a sense, we are actually in a G0 world. We don't have any leaders. And we don't have any kind of a cooperative kind of monetary policy. And it also has some reference. I mean, I think we need to read this statement with what Federal Reserve Bank of Chairman said last week. She said that yes, we are aware of the spillover effects of tapering of quantitative easing, and she said that she cannot really do anything out of it. But the argument that central bank governor, I mean Dr. Rajan is giving, and many other people, I think Chinese and all, expressing is that, I mean, you cannot leave this leadership. You cannot say that we are not worried about what happens in the emerging market economies. So in a sense, when you are doing this unconventional monetary policy, and when you are doing this tapering talk, it's almost 2 years now. The tapering talk is already there and seen that volatility across the world.
Across the world.
And even now, the Federal Reserve Chairman says that we are not worried about it. I think that's the triggering point for the emerging market central bankers.
Okay. So, would you agree with that?
I would say yes. His basic concern to perhaps is that you would expect a much quicker process of transition to a normal monetary policy in the West than what he's saying. That's, I think Bhanu is right, that his concern is that this is not happening. In fact, Europe is just starting its quantitative
In fact,
easing.
if you look at IMF statement, Christine Lagarde said that the US has to postpone that tapering talk until March. And Janet Yellen comes and says that, no, we cannot wait until then. We have to do our own policies for our growth. I think that's where US is losing the leadership of the world.
I'll come to you. Let me get Renu in on this. Renu, actually he was talking, Raghuram Rajan was talking of the way the growth is trying to be produced. You know, you're trying to create some kind of a, in fact, you're not creating growth, you're only shifting growth. So, in this context, was he giving a warning to the developed economies and the kind of impact it would have on developing economies like India, for instance?
My understanding, I read the speech quite carefully, and my understanding is that he's seeking to draw attention and give the example or the parallel with the Great Depression and the Great Recession, as this one is called, is more aimed to draw attention to the kind of individual country policies that are being pursued, and which is translatingly effectively to push the burden of adjustment upon the emerging markets. He's talked about this last year also, and in a sense he's repeating himself out here, and I think he deserves to be commended for taking the leadership in this regard, because he's talking about how competitive devaluations and beggar-thy-neighbor policies, something which the globalized world of the 1920s and 30s also followed, and eventually what happened thereafter then, as historically as he is warning now, is that growth is not coming, sustainable growth is not coming from either loose fiscal policies, which were followed in 2009, then there was a shift towards ultra easy monetary policy for the 2 years following after, and then recently from last year onwards there is again more of a focus upon fiscal policies, and each year, as we find from 2011 onwards, we find that growth forecasts are continuously downgraded. The year begins with robust growth forecasts and all that. So he is drawing attention to the fact that sustainable growth is eluding us. It's not coming from the kind of policies that are being pursued, and besides, by sucking in demand from here and there, you're only, growing for a few months, because ultimately there are feedback effects of that competitive devaluations, because some other country slows down. So, it's not leading to anything. So, in that context, he's asked for this before also, to play by the rules of the game or establish some kind of rules of the game, whereas exchange rate policies, or rather unconventional monetary easing, a byproduct of that is an exchange rate appreciation. First it happened to the dollar, now then to the Japanese yen, and now the euro. So ultimately he's pointing to the fact that this growth is coming at the cost of global growth. The global economy as a whole isn't getting anywhere, and therefore it's time to sit down and take more coordinated action rather than shifting from one place to another.
Okay. Paranjoy?
Girish, as we are talking, the world economy and the world financial markets are in a state of turmoil. The reason the government of Greece in Athens has mandated that the banks in Greece will not be operating for the week.
Today, at least 2 days, they have said.
No, till the 6th. Till the 6th. Now, there's panic in Greece. The economy is in a mess. I mean, 1/4 of the population of Greece is without jobs. Half of the youth don't have work. The economy itself has shrunk by about 1/5 in the last 3 or 4 years. The question is, what kind of impact will it have on the world economy? Let me disagree with Mr. Nitin Desai, who is an eminent economist. Obviously, we are not going to have a replication of what happened 85 years ago. The world economy has changed. Of course not. But look at the similarities and look at the differences. The difference is the economies of the world are more closely integrated than ever before. You can have a problem in one country which will have its ripple effect across the globe. Secondly, the point that Ms. Renu Kohli pointed out, and let me quote you exact quotes based on that clarification, what Dr. Raghuram Rajan said. He said that the policies followed by major central banks around the world were in danger of slipping into the kind of beggar thy neighbor strategies that were followed in the 1930s. Now, a beggar thy neighbor policy is that one country, its economy, it tries to remedy its own problems, but at the expense of somebody else, right? So you are, in a sense, making your neighboring country, a beggar. Again, let me quote Dr. Rajan. He says, I do worry that we are slowly slipping into the kind of problems that we had in the 30s in attempts to activate growth. And he said, I think this is a problem for the world. It's not just a problem for industrial countries or emerging markets. It's a problem for all of us. Then he says, are we trying to produce growth out of nowhere, or are we in fact shifting growth from each other rather than creating growth? And then he says, of course, there is past history of this during the Great Depression when we got into competitive devaluation. Now you must understand, Dr. Raghuram Rajan is not a fire-breathing leftist radical like the Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis. Okay? He is, in my own way, I believe he is a conservative economist. He's been groomed in the University of Chicago. He taught there for about almost 2 decades. That's where Milton Friedman come up. And if you even read the book, the famous book he co-authored with Luigi Zingales, he said it's saving capitalism from the capitalists. So he's a firm believer in the virtues of free enterprise capitalism. So when he makes the kind of statements that he does, I'm not surprised that it should be interpreted in this manner. In 2005, in the presence of Alan Greenspan at a meeting at Jackson Hole, he said that there is a crisis about to happen. People scoffed at him.
Yes.
In his own book, Fault Lines, this is exactly what he writes. I exaggerate only a bit when I say I felt like an early Christian who had wandered into a convention of half-starved lions. He felt he was being eaten up by everything. Then 2 years later, he was being congratulated. Yes, you are right. And what did he say?
So that is exactly
he
why
was bang on right. He was bang on. So I'm trying to argue that he wasn't being an alarmist. He's saying that the world may be slipping into another financial crisis. You had one. It started in 2007. Wall Street collapsed in September 2008. Parts of the world have recovered. Parts of the world were less insulated. Europe is in a bad way. Today, Russia is in a bad way. Today, Japan is in a bad way. The growth in the US has been faltering. It's been fragile. So I am not really. I think what Dr. Rajan is saying, he's warning the whole world that be prepared for the worst. That's right.
Mr.
You can
Desai?
hope for the best.
We should take the warning seriously. That's what I mean. That's what I think.
It's always good to do the warning. There's an old tradition in forecasting, which is when given an option of forecasting pessimistic outcome or optimistic one, always forecast the pessimistic one. If it happens, I can say, I told you so. If it doesn't happen, you're so happy that you forget what I said. So that's fine. That's a good idea. It's a good idea. But what I'm arguing is that, first, I do not think we are yet in a phase of competitive devaluations.
You're not?
No, we are not in that phase. Nor is there any sort of wild increase in protectionism as yet. Remember this.
But he is talking of protectionism.
Yes, it is.
He's using the word protectionism.
Please remember, 2008 onwards, people have been saying it will become protectionist. It is now
He's also talking about competitive monetary easing.
Yeah, competitive monetary easing. In fact, let's be very frank. Europe was overdue In fact, people were arguing, why are the Europeans delaying quantitative easing for so long? And so that the aspect of the unconventional monetary policy was widely accepted. I think where he's probably right is that he still does not see what is there in the system which is going to revive household and investment demand. That is what his basic concern is, that without that fundamental increase in demand, you're not going to be able to get out of this buyers. Like Japan for 20 years.
Mr. Desai, is he questioning the entire focus on growth when the fundamentals are still not strong?
Absolutely. In fact, you see in one of his things, he does raise that issue as to is growth passé in the West. I would say that the reason I'm little less concerned,
little less alarmed
is partly because I think the focus of global growth shifted from the West. If you look at the evidence for the past decade, a much larger proportion of the growth was generated through expansion in China and other parts of the world. Now, I would actually, frankly, be far more worried about a Chinese slowdown than about what is happening.
Hasn't that already happened, Dr.
It's already happening. And that would
China,
worry me much
growing
more.
at double digits for 3 decades, is now saying 7%.
The Chinese slowdown would worry me much more than now. Of course, in India, we have. It's a mix. It's a blessing also in some ways. It brings down commodity prices and things like that. But overall, it does have a major effect on global demand, and that will spill over. You see this in our export figures.
Our exports are down by
figures are showing
Absolutely. Not just here, across the world, there's Bhanumurthy. When he also says that, countries should work together on capital flows. What does he mean by that?
Well, I think just to add to what Professor Desai said, I mean, I'll come to your question. Just to add to what he has said, I think we are more worried about China rather than Greece.
We should be. You mean we should be more
worried for the Chinese growth slowdown rather than with the Greece, which is going to be a slightly one-off kind of event. I mean, if you take, for example, what happened today, it started with almost 2 percentage point reduction in the BSE Sensex.
Yes, some 400, 500 points.
At the end, it ended with only 0.7% downgrade. So, in a sense, for India, I think we need to worry more about Chinese growth, what's happening there. And also, in fact, let me get Dr. Rajan's speech, which he made some time back. We also need to worry about how to generate our own domestic demand.
Absolutely.
In the absence of global demand, in the absence of the export growth, which Paranjoy already raised it, and in the presence of where we are following some kind of beggar than neighbor policies across the world, I think we need to focus more on creating domestic demand. In fact, Dr. Rajan was the first to highlight that Make in India should be for Make in India for India. I think he has actually put the policies for India per se, saying that India should focus more on generating domestic demand, less on concentrating on the export demand. I think that is, I mean, you need to look at all this yesterday's statement and what he made in the past together, and we need to see, I think we need to really focus more on reviving growth by creating more domestic demand rather than looking at export growth. Regarding the capital flows, yes, I think Renu may be a right person to comment on this. She has done so much work on that. Right now, any trigger that happens in the financial world, I think we are seeing capital flow.
Volatile movements.
Volatile. I think this has been happening since 2003 May. I think that's something we are more worried about. Again, we really don't have any international system to have a coordinated capital flows, capital policies.
Okay, Renu, would you like to elaborate on that? When he says that there should be all the countries should work together on capital flow, is it possible in the kind of situation which we are in?
Well, certainly, because you see, the world today is very, very financially interconnected, and emerging market economies like such as India's, their financial markets are not as advanced and as sophisticated as those of the West. which is not to say that the West has done better, because, the 2008 global financial crisis stemmed from North America, for example. It originated in their financial markets and which bore the brunt. But the point is very simple, is that, when you have spillovers of monetary policies, you have conditions which are either excessive global liquidity or, excessively or out. In either way, it's not the perfect condition. There is no stability. So there is financial instability, and then by that logic, breaking that down, instability in asset prices, stocks, bonds, currencies, moving up and down with the vagaries of the global monetary cycle is a real concern, because there are feedback effects, particularly, not so much as from the stocks, but from the monetary policy perspective, domestic monetary policy perspective, as well as exchange rate. There are feedback effects upon the real economy, and so much of price uncertainty obviously disrupts real activity. So yes, there is a need to have some kind of, maybe kind of a tax on capital flows, which would work only if all countries agreed upon it, or some kind of universal approach towards capital controls, so that countries are able to prevent the spillover effects beyond that which does not conflict with their domestic monetary policy objectives. One point I wish to make about taking up from Dr. Desai's thing about retreat into protectionism, there hasn't been that kind of retreat as we saw in the following the Great Depression of the 1930s, but certainly the fact that there has been no significant trade deal in the post-crisis period from 2009 until now is a matter of concern. The second is that there is a retreat by many countries into regional or even bilateral trade partnerships,
right,
which automatically goes to establish parallel rules of the game and weakens the WTO, wherein the table at which all countries jointly were coordinating trade negotiations and trade opening up. So that boost to global growth, which would come from trade liberalization, hasn't been, the world as a whole has not been able to reap any gains from that. One example of this is the pursuing by the United States of the TIPP and the TPP, the Pacific and the Investment and Listening Partnerships. Then there is strengthening of ASEAN and many countries,
right,
also including India, laying more emphasis upon bilateral trade deals. So overall, in a global sense, we do not know exactly what effects, how these effects might play out, but from past, we can say that overall global trade might just, shift in diverting trade from one to the other, and the net outcome may not be very gainful.
Okay. So, Mr. Desai, would you like to react to that?
Well, I'd say that
I would like to.
I would say that yes, she's right, that the focus is very much on TPP, TTIP. But if they do the TPP and the transatlantic one, it would actually be trade promoting, because in a sense it is addressing some of the issues which could not be addressed in the WTO. Incidentally, I believe that India, by ignoring what is happening there, is making a big mistake, because the future standards...
Ignoring what's happening.
Ignoring what's happening in the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership particularly, which concerns us far more than the transatlantic one. And today China is also not participating in that, but they are being very careful in making sure that they can meet the standards which will be set by TPP. But this is a different game. I don't want to get into that. But Renu is right that WTO, the negotiations are completely in doldrums. But I do not think the alternatives which are emerging, which is the bilateral deals, the regional deals, are necessarily trade restricting. They may well. I would say just one thing, one big difference between 1930s and now is the extent of global trade which is in integrated global value chains. One company with operations in many different places, and there the dynamics of that are very different from the beggar my neighbor type dynamics.
Okay.
I want to draw certain parallels. I go along entirely with what Ms. Renu, Kohli, Dr. Desai and Mr. Bhaumurthy are saying, but let me go back a little bit. You see, the Great Depression started with the stock market collapsing in October 29. Remember what happened after that. Exactly 10 years later, you had the Second World War. The Second World War and the growth of the military-industrial complex in the United States of America. And after the Second World War, the Marshall Plan, all of it helped the world get out of that Great Depression.
Right.
Obviously, we are not going to see history repeat itself in exactly the same way. Remember, at that point of time, over that decade, international trade had come down by almost half. And in the first 4 years itself, the world economy, global gross domestic product had collapsed by about 15%. Unemployment was rampant. And factories were shutting down. Wait. What I'm saying, don't ignore the parallels. And here, once again, as Dr. Raghuram Rajan himself said, the financial crisis of 2007-2008 was not merely on account of greedy investment bankers or inept politicians or apathetic bureaucrats. He has rightly pointed out, we as rational individuals, we make choices collectively. They may seem rational to us, but when you look at a flawed international financial system, happened, these bankers, they were taking incredible risks, which were out of sync completely, and then then it collapsed. So I am merely saying that you have American indebtedness continuing, and you think that's going to power economic growth across the world. There is growing inequality. Again, Dr. Rajan is a firm believer in the virtues of free enterprise capitalism. He says growing inequality was one of the important reasons. And if anything, between 2008 and now, the world has become more unequal within nation states and across nation states.
On India, is there some lessons or tips which Indian government, Indian policy makers need to take from what Rajan
said? I think what we need, as I said earlier, he's already making a statement that the world is actually more riskier than what we have seen in 2008. I'm not really sure whether he's comparing with that risk of 1930, but and he says that there's no way for adapting the export-led growth as some of the economies have adapted in before 2008. And he's also saying that there's no way one can achieve the pre-crisis growth. In a sense, he's saying that the potential growth of the world economy has actually come down. So you cannot really aspire for reaching that pre-crisis growth kind of situation. And at the same time, he also has some kind of prescriptions. One of them is he clearly says that countries like us has to concentrate more on investing in infrastructure.
The key takeaway for me from this is the government. When you say make in India and invite foreign investment, why don't you address the issue of domestic corporates?
Right.
The
kind of corporate debt you're talking about?
Corporate debt and the fact that there are 800 odd stalled projects, according to the economic survey. Now, how do you, the fact is that foreign investment of the sort that China got, which was directed at meeting global demand, you're not going to get. You are probably going to get some foreign investment which is attracted by domestic demand. But then at the same, if that is the case, why don't you do something about reviving your corporate investment process?
No, but I think there's one more point in the list. They say that he focuses, he says that PPP can be one of the options for countries to grow. But I think our experience on PPP is really very...
Yes.
2 points. As what Dr. Desai said, the issue, how do you revive domestic investment? For the first time in the history of this country in the last few years, outward flow of foreign investments, that means Indian industrialists have been investing more outside than foreigners have been investing.
Absolutely.
Secondly, I'm not as confident as he is that oil prices will collapse, commodity prices will come down. What happened in 2008? In one calendar year, the price of oil went up from $40 to $147 and then came crashing back to 40. What have we seen over the last year? $115 to below 50, now it's about 65. I'm not so sure that we're going to see the same patterns. But one thing is very clear, more uncertainty, more volatility, and none of that will be good for any economy, including ours.
Okay. Renu, one sentence, please. Last words to you.
Well, if I were to sum up his Dr. Rajan's speech, I would just say that he's drawing attention particularly the whole world as a whole and Western countries, is that do not try or to make any further attempts for getting growth out of changing prices, which is exchange rates, but look to the fundamentals and see if we can execute structural reforms and get growth from lasting basis.
Okay, I think on that note, we need to end. But it has been a fascinating debate. It's a warning to the entire world. Of course, India also needs to take note of it, as my panelists have said. We will wait and watch how this thing will pan out, how the Indian government and its policy makers will react to all these things. Thanks to all my guests. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in the big picture, same time tomorrow.